Hopefully you have your snacks, because this is, I know this is going to be a long one. What is up, BookTube? It is Monty, and I'm here today to discuss what I think is probably my most anticipated. I don't know. I feel like when I tweeted out that I was reading this, I got a lot of responses from people going, I can't wait to see your review, which happens on occasion. You know, sometimes, like Heather or someone will like reply or slide into the DMs and go like, oh, you're reading that? I can't wait to hear what you think. But this was just, like, this was far more than Heather. It wasn't, you know, like hundreds of people. It was like 5 people. But still, that's something new. I feel blessed. So shout out to Melanie from Melted the Any for sending this to me, because Tor did not want me. I don't think there was like a vendetta against me or anything. But I requested this arc multiple times, at least once from like sending an email, twice on Edelweiss. I'm still pending on NetGalley. All of those did not come through. So without Melanie, this review of Docile by KM Spera would not, I think I'm pronouncing that right. KM tweeted a long time ago that the Z was silent, and Spera or Spara, I probably will use them interchangeably in this review. Back to what I was saying, this is a book that I think a lot of people are interested in my neck of the bookish internet, on my side of book Twitter. And so I feel really happy to be able to sit here today on release day with you guys and tell you my thoughts on it. Hopefully, it's still discounted places. I know it was 30% off on barnesandnoble.com. because this is an adult hardcover book, so it is pretty pricey without a discount. So hopefully at the end of this, if you're still interested in reading it, you can find it at a price that is comparable to its pre-release price, which is a little bit more affordable. I do want to disclaim that I did not go into this book completely blind to what I was going to get in. Once I kind of realized that Tor was not going to send me an arc, I was not going to get approved on Edelweiss or NetGalley, that this was just going to have to be something I got from the library or bit the bullet in pot on release day and tried to read with a quickness to get this video out. I did go ahead and get the free chapter sampler that is available. I mean, the first 6 are on Tor's website, so you don't even have to download anything. But the last 2 contain explicit material, and so I guess Tor was like, we can't put this on the website, which I think is kind of strange, considering the fact that it's included in the chapter sampler, which is also free material. So I don't know what goes into like what can be on the website and what can't be on the website. Either way, this explicit material was free. The whole scene. So like I understood going in, and I'd read reviews. I hadn't, you know, gone out of my way to avoid them. And I was going to increase after I started reading the chapter samplers, which is the first 8 chapters of the book, I was starting to grow increasingly concerned for the direction the book I thought was going in and the way that it would end. And I think in a lot of ways, my concerns, I don't want to say they were valid, but they weren't unfounded concerns. I think that the concerns that I had were present, but I feel like at the end of it, after having read the whole book, I'm not as annoyed with the actual book about not addressing these things as I am about readers. And so we're gonna talk about readers, and we're going to talk about the book, but we're going to start this whole thing off with what I like to call a history lesson. So the comment section is already grabbing their pitchforks. Shout out to y'all. Every time I seem to talk about the founding of America, people like to come for me. When I talked about it in my Gone with the Wind review years ago, people in the comment section thought I was stupid. When I talk about it in my American Royals review, which I loved the book. I said the book was entertaining, and that the fact there was an alternate history and all of these questions ultimately did not matter to me. Still, they wanted to act as though I did not understand basic early American history. And I think that in order to really get to the heart of what I did not like about Docile, we have to talk about slavery in the United States, because this is a book set in the United States, and a lot of reviewers are using this term slavery, and let's just get into it. So first, in context, I would like to point out that I understand that slavery is not a uniquely American institution, and that slavery has been practiced by lots of people in lots of places throughout time and still into the modern day. Okay. I think the book early on tries to point to Roman slavery as sort of an inspiration, the genesis of this situation here that we have. I think it was called Nexum, which just made me think of the sex cult that was branding people with the cult leader's initials. I think there's like an episode of it on Hulu, on like their little cult show, if you want to go and watch that. Which again, I think isn't good when you're just making me think of this sex cult that you couldn't have known about when they were drafting the book, just because I don't think they had been busted yet, and I'm sure that this cult was inspired by this Roman thing. But you set the book in Maryland, right? And so I think we need to go back to the 13 colonies, because slavery has always been prevalent in the United States, although for a really long time, it wasn't as big as it, came to be with the 4 million enslaved Africans. But I feel like the docile system is nothing like slavery, because slavery, I don't think anywhere on the planet that it has existed. Again, I can only speak to my narrow focus of expertise. I don't even say expertise, but my narrow knowledge base being in American slavery, and seeing as we're in America, in Maryland of all fucking places, with a high black population, I think we should talk about it. And I think that because the system that we've established here is more akin to indentured servitude, the fact that so many reviewers are referring to it as slavery really bothered me, because slavery in the United States has always been a race-based institution. And I think that because of slavery, a lot of the other world-building aspects of this novel don't make a lot of sense to me personally as a Black American. And so slavery really kicked off in the late 1600s here in the United States. Great time for us. Thank you, Virginia. I say thank you to Virginia because in the 1600s there was a rebellion that featured some lovely white and Black indentured servants banding together, because poor people, they really don't want to be poor. Valid decisions. And they went and they marched on Jamestown, and the governor of Virginia ran away, and Mr. Bacon was like, haha, we won, and then he died, because revolutionaries always be dying. And following that, you see throughout the colonies a more severe restriction on the rights and freedoms of the Black people in the colonies. Then you have the Royal African Company, disbanding, and their monopoly on the slave trade falling, and they're becoming cheaper to import to the colonies, which are increasingly reliant on labor-heavy cash crops, which, is this perfect storm. And then, general racism, because Black people are suited to these harsh environments that these delicate white bodies just could never do. And so then you see this just massive explosion of slaves in the United States, who aren't people, who are property, which is something the dociles are not. These dociles are not the property of their patron. They have distinct rights. They have distinct... they're still people, right? The docile, and then again, this is why I think the comparison to slavery is ill, and it's not a thing, because I think that indentured servants also had rights. They were, indentured servants were still considered full English citizens, and dociles, while they're the, servant person of their patron, they still, again, have these carved out rights that they are entitled to, which I think is silly, because the book introduces the drug docilene, which I think just undermines completely all of those rights. None of the rights seem to be respected at any point in the novel, but we'll get to that later. So following, our lovely rebellion and the increased harshness of slavery and the disbandment of the Royal African Company and the explosion of slaves in the South, for the next, until the present day, essentially, you have Black people always living with this wealth gap between white people, because of the fact of all of these situations that happened that would create this thing. And so the idea that inheriting your parents' debt balloons to this problem that we're going to call dystopian is really a white person's nightmare. This the intergenerational debt crisis situation is already a reality for a lot of black and brown people because of slavery, because of the failures of Reconstruction, because of Jim Crow, because of redlining. All of these things, I think, balloon to make the fact that we're following white and it's not that I wanted Cam Sparrow to focus on a black protagonist here. It's just to say that yes, this is a situation that I think is horrible that we would find ourselves in Docile. But at the end of the day, I think that it's not a dystopian. It's not a near far, and I don't think this is a near future. I think this is definitely like a far future situation, just given the time that it would take to get to this place, which I think is at least 100 years in the future from here, which again, 100 years ago isn't really that long ago. I'm just saying, like, it's not, as a black person, 100 years is nothing. I don't like the idea of calling it a near future when I think that it is very plainly at least 100 years in the future from our current situation. And I think that to argue that we shouldn't view it from our current situation projected forward instead of just a completely alternate timeline is not an argument that Cam Sparrow makes. And Cam Sparrow makes far and few arguments in this book, which I thought was rather odd considering the tagline of the book has been "There's no consent under capitalism." And I'm not really sure where we go from here, because if you're looking at American slavery, that boomed and became ever popular under mercantilism. So it's like, this isn't like a one economic system problem. Like, the idea of massive wealth inequality isn't unique to capitalism, but I'm not an economist. I hardly understand it. I'm not really going to go into all of that lovely, happy bullshit. But now that we've had a discussion on the history of slavery in America and why I think that it's problematic to say that these things are slavery, let's talk about Docile. So Docile starts off with our lovely protagonist, Elisha, giving us the 7 rights of the Dociles, because he's going to go to the debt resolution office and he's going to go and have his debt hopefully paid off by a wealthy patron. And what follows, I thought, was really hard to read. So if we were just to fast forward to Elisha and Alex being together, I think that if there was any commentary in the book, it is very clearly that the ultra wealthy can do whatever they want and there are no consequences. I think that that's the central conceit of the novel. I think it's really the only argument that Cam Sparrow makes. As you can see, we have a little bit of a costume change. The air kicked on, the battery died. I'm gonna have to run in like 20 minutes, so hopefully this will be the last costume change we get of the video, but it probably won't be. So I left off talking about how I felt that the commentary was really big picture items. But the first act of the book is definitely set up for the ramification section, which I call Act 2, and then the third act, which I think is a flaming hot pile of garbage. So let's discuss. I think that a lot of the conversation pre-release has been around the first act of the book, which deals with the graphic depictions of sexual assault, rape, abuse. I would just call it torture. Of Elisha. I view all of that as just pretty much torture porn, and I thought all of it was handled like it was. I don't know how you write a respectful like rape scene. Like, I don't think that you can. They just kind of existed to exemplify, I think, the theme that the ultra wealthy can do whatever they want, but in a world where I wasn't really invested, that I didn't really think made a lot of sense, I didn't care. Now, as for why I didn't think the world made sense, basically, I think I touched on this already, but basically the conceit of the novel is, at some point in this timeline's history, the United States, and really, it seems like a global phenomenon, passed these next of kin laws, wherein a person's debt becomes intergenerational. I already touched on how I felt that would disproportionately affect people of color, particularly Black Americans, since this is set in Maryland. Touched on that already. I'm not going to go back into that spiel, but we pass these laws. Debt becomes like you inherit your parents' debt. Most people in the society are not getting married because then your debt becomes each other's burden. Why these people would continue to have children doesn't really make sense to me when their children for sure inherit it. But that's the world framework that we're living in. And your two choices seem to be paid off. But whatever the case is, his parents, his whole little village community outside of Baltimore is very much in debt. They can't really find ways to get out of this debt. The only option really seems to be like become a docile or go to debtor's prison. Although the docile option never makes sense to me as an institution, because Elisha only has negative experiences. Like Elisha, when we're with him and Alex, he's never referencing any kind of good stories that he's heard. I mean, sure, there are like posters on the wall, but like literally every story Elisha's heard about becoming a docile, if you remove his mother, who was, you know, obviously a first-hand example of what he doesn't want to become and why he chooses to refuse docilene, the drug. They're like missing toes, they're have injuries that they don't remember sustaining. They are used at group sex parties. They're repeatedly raped. They are like abused and tortured. So why anybody would choose to do that when the alternative is prison? Like, I think what would make this a more compelling story for me personally was if there wasn't really a choice, like you just became a docile if your debt got to a certain extent or something. Because having the debtor's prison option there, I've never been to debtor's prison. I can't really, I don't have, one, I don't have debt, so there's that. But two, I've just never been in a position to incur it. And two, I've never been to prison. But in my mind, logically, even if you were trying to set up a better life for your little sister Abby, I think that going to prison, I don't know, I think that would just be, that would be the choice that I would make. I wouldn't choose to subject myself to be raped or forced into manual labor for the rest of my life. Like, the character motivations I don't really think make sense. I don't think that they do. I think they exist solely to have these kinky sex scenes. Like, I'm sorry. I think that's really, I think that's really what it boils down to. I think that Cam Sparrow wanted to write some kinky shit, and so he crafted this universe where the commentary is piss poor, the world doesn't make sense, the internal logic is broken, and this is what we got. And I think that you could argue that it's not fair for me to say that the internal logic of the world is broken because people did abuse slaves. But again, slaves were property. Like, you have to think about it, like, if you bought, like, a bookcase, right? Like, I went to Target, I bought this was like $40. If I bring this bookcase home that I bought and I decide that I'm going to carve my initials into it every day at 3 o'clock, then I can do that. It's the same rationale with the slave. However, with the docile, they're not really your property. Like I said, it's more akin to indentured servitude. It's an exchange of goods, right? Like, the patron is wiping out this person's debt, so they're paying $3 million, so this person doesn't carry debt around anymore. They have upward mobility possibilities. Good for them. And in exchange for that, you're going to cook, clean, and apparently get repeatedly sexually assaulted. That doesn't make sense, especially when the dociles have rights that are clearly established, and I think that the right to personal safety would guarantee that you wouldn't be sexually assaulted. And I understand that the ultra wealthy would have, you know, more money and means, and if you're on docile, if you're on docilene, then obviously it's portrayed that your function is impaired. And I understand that, you know, big pharmaceutical companies like Bishop Laboratories would be able to lobby the government in order to make these things happen, in terms of the drug being regulated. But really, docilene only seems to exist in Maryland in this book. We see a news thing in passing about the state of California approving docilene to work there, but all of Europe has refused to approve docilene for use with their docile programs. And so the fact that this is really a centrally located situation that's been going on for like 100 years and no one else seems to have adopted this practice, I think that it would be really easy to have like lawsuits about the fact that this drug is illegal. Like, it's blatantly illegal. It is designed to make a person more compliant. It is designed to make them more willing. It is designed to erase the rights that they have. And then once they are free with their missing toe or their health issues that they incurred as a result of being your docile, the patron is seemingly no longer on the hook. And again, this is a situation where I think that the logic of the world doesn't make sense. Again, I understand that if the theme of the book is the ultra wealthy can do whatever they want with no consequences, fine, sure, go for it. But I felt that it was really lazy. I felt that it was entirely too lazy. And I think that I also feel that the book is disjointed. So let's circle back to Elisha meeting Alex and them going off on their way together. They meet at the Office of Debt Resolution, which is where you go when you want to become a docile to get matched with your, trillionaire person. They match, they go home, and immediately Alex starts to, condition Elisha in his new situation. Elisha, and pretty soon on, I think it's like chapter 5, it might be chapter 6, he refuses Docile. In chapter 7, he is raped for the first time. And in chapter 8, we get the rape from the point of view of Alex. And then from then on, like I said earlier, it's a series of really intense scenes. The first 150 or so pages are really intense in terms of the sexual assault scenes, both from Alex's perspective and from Elisha's. Alex is not the only person that sexually assaults Elisha. There is a scene wherein, this is also a really petty thing, but something that I really didn't think made sense just in terms of where we are as a society now, but we'll get to it in a second. There's a scene at Alex's friend has a party and the dociles are there, and Alex tells, first he has Elisha blow his friend Dutch's, blow Dutch. So that was a thing. And then Elisha was forced to lick Dutch's cum from the floor, which again, I think would violate the 6th right to, sexual health or something. We don't know what Dutch has or doesn't have or anything, but we're just freely out here using him. I think it also violates his right to personal safety, but that whatever. But then Alex forces Elisha into like a group orgy situation where he is then assaulted by the only, not the only named black man. There is a black man in like the 3rd act of the book. I think he's like a psychiatrist. Where he is assaulted by a black man named Onyx. And the fact that Cam Sparrow thought that naming the black man Onyx was cute or something. And a lot of these other dociles seem to have a name that isn't their legal name, which is fine, like, whatever. I think that the point of it is a little silly. I didn't really understand the point of it. But fine, I understood like that was like a theme here. And I think that Dutch's all had like a unifying theme of being named after like gemstones or precious stones because his other docile was opal. I get it, but it still felt really fucking racist. Coupled with the fact that like later on in the novel, one of the B plots that becomes the main plot out of nowhere is this Empower Maryland group, which is seeking to restore docile rights or get rid of the docile system or at least get rid of Docile. Something. They're like a revolutionary group because this is a sci-fi novel. I don't think it is. I think this is really a literary fiction novel dressed up as a sci-fi novel, but whatever. Good luck. People talk about there's no space on the shelf at fucking Barnes & Noble for new adult. The publishers don't like it. I think that Docile doesn't fit on the sci-fi shelf. I think if you put it in general fiction, I don't think it would sell well. And the way that it ends, I think you could argue it belongs on the romance shelf. But even then, I'm just like, where's Barnes & Noble? Like, when I walk in on Tuesday, today, if I wanted to buy this, what shelf am I supposed to look at? I think I'm supposed to go to the sci-fi section, but this is not really a sci-fi book. That's my little mini rant. Anyway, so Onyx sexually assaults Elisha. At the time, Onyx is presented as an on-med docile, but events later on in the book reveal that to not be the case, and I think that it pushes that interaction into another gray space, which then pushes Onyx and Elisha's interaction in the 3rd act of the book again into a gray space that I don't mind the gray space necessarily, but because it doesn't offer any commentary and it doesn't examine the space, I feel like it just kind of exists. And in this kind of a book, I don't think any of these actions should just kind of exist. So that's the thing. So the first, like I said, 150 pages of the book is repeated torture, sexual assault, abusive situations, just general abuse, like physical, regular abuse without sexual components. they're really hard to get through, and I think a lot of the discussion of the book has centered on those first 150 pages because it is really jarring. And it really does, I think, just serve to set up the middle of the book, which kind of, if you, depending on how you judge the second act, it does go by rather quickly. But most of the sex of the book is in the first half of the book, and again, most of it is in this situation where it acts as setup for the second act, which I think that's when the book starts to fall apart. I think that for the first half of the book, you have Alex trying to assert his dominance, trying to show his family whatever he's trying to show his family, doing whatever he wants to do to Elisha. But the second half of the book, I think, was meant to be him coming to terms with the fact that Elisha was a real person. But the way that it was written, it kind of really just comes across to me as the reader as Alex growing bored because he had trained Elisha too well. The book does the thing that I do not like, where it skips chunks of time. And I kind of waffle on it there because it's like, do I really need to see all of those moments of Elisha being abused to understand that this is the result of it, he becoming this fully compliant person who is completely dependent on Alex? No. Do I think that it's realistic for that to happen in a 6-month period of time? Probably. I've never been in this kind of a position, right? So I can't really, and I'm not like a psychiatrist or anything, so it's hard for me to judge Elisha's state of mind. I think the fact that we get to them being a fully compliant person is really the goal here. And so I think that even though I had some issues in terms of passage of time issues and in terms of just getting there in general, I think that getting there was a logical point and I was fine with it overall. But by the time we got there, where Elisha was this fully compliant person, and Alex is starting to realize that he had trained Elisha too well, it really reads to me as Alex getting bored. It reads as though he really liked the challenge of breaking Elisha. He liked the challenge of Elisha being a full person, and now that Elisha has no really anything to him other than what Alex describes or wants from him, he's like, well, I don't want you anymore. And he sends Elisha away, and Alex breaks because Elisha doesn't know how to do anything anymore. Like, he spent the past 6 months completely being abused and raped and just broken and remolded into a person that he can't operate on his own anymore. And I felt that that was probably the most interesting section of the book, where I thought we were going to have to deal with that. And in a way, I think the third act kind of does, but I also think the third act introduces an element of the story that I wasn't a huge fan of. So this is like the third costume change. You can still see my green shirt underneath. But as I dropped off my cousin, I figured that I'm just going to continue talking about this book here and now. And Editing Monty will try and, like, I don't know. This video review is going to be all over the place. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the third act of the book. Now, the third act of the book, I feel, goes off the rails a little bit. Like, in the sense that everything that happened in the third act of the book was set up previously. So the Empower Maryland storyline really comes into its own in the third act. My issue with the Empower Maryland storyline, though, is that I felt that it took what was really essentially a character-driven novel and made it have a plot that wasn't really important. Like, the Empower Maryland storyline was really, I would say, a C-tier plot. I wouldn't even call it a B-level plot. Like, the characters are introduced, they're important, they make little cameos, but they're never important to Elisha. And even when the lawsuit is happening, I don't think they're really important to Elisha. I feel like because of it, we don't really, I think we spend far too much time in the third act focusing on the lawsuit and less time on what I think would be the more interesting storyline of deprogramming Elisha's abuse that he suffered. We kind of get moments of it, but the moments we get are all with, again, Onyx, who I hated his name,
We get revealed that he was actually off med the entire time. He was fully cognizant of what he was doing. I understand that he was not in control of his actions still because he's thought to play the part, but I feel like that shades all of the previous interactions in a way that's kind of gross. People point to this this third act moment, I think, is what they're talking about when they're talking about the consensual BDSM scenes. For me, while they were consensual, like, Elisha still wasn't fully, like, he was still in the process of learning who he was. And, like, again, I think this was this is a nuanced conversation where, did he learn that he liked these things at the hands of the abuse? Yes. Does that make what he likes any less valid? No. I really like that moment where he said that. I'm going to reiterate that. I think, again, this book had really... I'm going to turn off the blinker. I'm a bad driver now. Perfect, the light changed. So, yes, I can agree with all of the sentiments that just because he learned it while he was being abused by Alex doesn't make that his appreciation of those aren't still things that he actually enjoys. But because of the fact that we learned that Onyx was fully aware of his actions when he was having sex earlier in the novel with Elisha, when they're having consensual sex and Elisha is still in the middle of, like, coming to terms with life after Alex, it just was still gross to me, and it was still not something I appreciated. Even though I really wanted to appreciate a lot of the things with Onyx, because another thing that gets brought up at this point, I mean, they talked about how Elisha's parents were kind of polyamorous before, but when they were talking about it before, it felt to me like, well, they're polyamorous because the neighbor's wife died, and, you know, Elisha's mom is still suffering the effects of the docile, so it's not like they can really get divorced. So his dad is just kind of, it was weird. But the third act firmly establishes that Elisha's parents are polyamorous, and that Onyx is part of a polyamorous situation with Dutch and Opal, wherein Dutch and Onyx are an item, and Dutch and Opal are an item, but Opal and Onyx don't really fuck around like that. And that's the kind of polyamory that I want to see in books. I like that. And so there was a lot going on with Onyx's character that I appreciated, but it was all kind of like, I had to suffer with the fact that his name was fucking Onyx, he was kind of a rapist, and he was kind of taking advantage of Elisha. Even in the consensual third act part, Onyx talks about how, you know, it wasn't right for me to do that, even though I knew that not about the sex they had earlier in the book, but there's like a moment post in the same third act situation where Onyx, he hits Elisha, and Elisha likes it, but, you know, Onyx had no way of knowing that when it happened, and he recognized that, and he apologizes for that action. And so, like, again, like, there was some really good stuff that was happening while the train tracks were going off the rails, but we couldn't spend any time with it because we were so focused on this lawsuit being brought by Alex's father, Alex. We're just gonna call him the second. So the second sues Elisha for, like, fraud and, like, trying to manipulate his son into forgiving the debt and then going back on the contract and being like, you were here for 6 months, but it's over and we're done with. The whole lawsuit is really set up for the Empower Maryland storyline, wherein they want to bring down the bishops and bring down docile. And again, because we've established that docile is really only widely available or widely used within the state of Maryland, it's so odd for this group to be like, I mean, do I think that this group should exist 100%? Because I think the drug is stupid, and I think that the internal logic I've already talked about being broken a lot. But even if I didn't, you know, think that the internal logic was broken, or I didn't think that the drug was stupid and it was subversive of everything that was going on here, I still think the Empower Maryland storyline just doesn't work. Even if I didn't think any of these things, right? Like, even if I was fully on board with it, I still didn't really appreciate the Empower Maryland storyline. I thought that, again, it took us out of all of these character-driven moments where I felt that we could have really come to understand Alex's perspective. But once again, I felt that Alex's motives were really as a result of outside factors, and not him really recognizing anything that was happening within himself. And even though he's the one that got to have like this really great speech in the third act, actually no, it was Elisha. In the third act, Elisha has this really big speech about how the debt system raped him, Alex raped him. It's when he finally is able to come to terms with the fact that Alex not only was abusing him, but he admits it out loud for the first time, right? Because he talks about how, yes, Alex raped him, but so did the United States government, so did the pharmaceutical industry. Like, all of these things, all of these oppressive factors conspired to allow the situation to happen. And it's a really great moment, except for the fact that I don't think the book, like, it's too far, like, we're too far gone. I think that, it felt like, because we had spent so much time with this stupid lawsuit narrative, we didn't get to really spend the time with Elisha to have him come to these realizations. Like, we spend some time with him coming to these realizations, but because of we suddenly have a plot that we need to have, even though the rest of the whole rest of the book had been character driven, by the time that this happens, it's kind of like, well, I mean, there's a couple of pages until the end of the book. Like, what more? Like, what is, why really? And so I didn't appreciate Alex's motivation at the end of the book, and I didn't appreciate Elisha's speech where he says all of that, because it was kind of like, I wish I could have spent the time with you to really see you come to this organically and not see, you know, like 7 different characters telling you what to do. You know, it just didn't work for me. I also felt that Elisha was really right in a lot of the instances at the end of the book where, you know, he was supposedly free, but all of these other characters were sort of making decisions for him, and he was just kind of going along with it, and none of the other characters seemed to be understanding that they were part of, like, I don't want to say part of the problem, but they weren't really part of a solution. Because again, they were, like, sure, under the guise of helping Elisha, fine, but at the same time, they were using him just as Alex had. He was their pawn now instead of a trillionaire's pawn. And so, again, this idea of being able to use people and not suffer the consequences, I don't think works when you have, I mean, I guess the Empower Maryland people aren't trillionaires, but they certainly seem to have money as a nonprofit organization. The individual members are not suffering in any kind of way that was similar to Elisha's suffering, even if Dutch used to be a docile. Like, their predicaments are very different, and so the idea that, again, this book offers no commentary. It sets up commentary, obviously, because I've been able to ramble on now for like an hour here, right? So I think that it certainly prompts a discussion, but I don't think that K.M. Sparrow knew where he wanted this discussion to go. I think that the idea of the discussion was enough. I think that the idea that the discussion would prompt people to be like, yeah, these are fucked up institutions, are fine. But I think that the way that they were written and the way that they were set up to be almost kind of like parodies of things, it ultimately weakens and cheapens the novel, and it's not something that I could really ever get behind. So there's all of that to be said. And now I think we need to talk about how the book ends. The book ends, and I said this earlier, I think that you could shelve this book on the romance shelf because it has a happily ever after. Like, is it kind of bittersweet? I guess. But the book ends with Elisha and Alex getting together and agreeing to kind of see where a consensual relationship between them could go. And in theory, I've said this in my DMs to Melanie, that I think that of all the ways this book could have ended, right? I think this is probably really the only one that I can't really support. Like, there's something about the idea of Elisha ending the book with the man who tortured him, who raped him, when we spend so little time with Alex to really believe that he is a changed person. Like, we see him do good deeds, right? We see him repeat over and over again that he cares about Elisha at the end of the book. But I feel like because of that lawsuit, I don't believe any of it. Because I am still of the mind that he really liked Elisha when Elisha was Elisha, right? But the moment that Elisha became boring to him, he was kind of over it. And I don't think we ever really got an adequate moment of him atoning or doing... And again, there's no consequences. This book sets up this idea that all of these things are bad, but at the end of the book, it reinforces all of them. Like, everything that happened here is totally fine. Like, it's a weird situation. It's a weird thing to do, I think. Like, and it doesn't really make sense. Again, I don't think there's actually any commentary. And I think that because Spera did no work here, what was the point of me having to experience this trauma? Like, what was there was no point for it. And so for him to end the book, I felt, with Alex, was, I don't want to say that it was, like, irresponsible or anything along, like, that sort of line of thinking, but in some ways, I really do think that it was kind of irresponsible for you to write, like, almost 500 pages and then end it with our rape victim getting with the rapist. Like, where, for what? For what reason do I need to read about a rape victim ending the book with their rapist? Because the rapist saw the error of their ways, even though they had zero consequences. I mean, I guess Alex got kicked out of his fancy penthouse. Like, is that it? Like, you don't get to live in a penthouse anymore, but you get to be neighbors with your rape victim and continue to try. It's so wild to me that I almost wish this was a duology so we could continue on with it, because it's wild that this is where you chose the story to end after offering, again, no actual commentary on any of the actual systems of oppression that you are, in theory, trying to dismantle or enlighten us on. And I don't know if ending the book with them not together would have been a better, like, ending, other than, like, I don't have to, go to bed at night thinking, oh yeah, and Elisha is still in love with his rapist. Like, I don't know if my peace of mind is an actual better ending than the one we got, but to me, I feel like it almost has to be, in a way, you know what I mean? Like, it just intellectually in my brain, it makes sense as a better ending, but who knows if I actually would have, if I had read that ending, been as satisfied. Because if we had that ending, I think we might have had a different third act, you know what I mean? So it's hard. So that's what I think about how the ultimate ending of the book was. I think that, again, it left a lot to be desired. It was not something that I was particularly happy to have had to read. And I'm going to end this little bit of the clip here so I can find a parking space, and I will talk to you in a little bit to actually wrap this up when I get home. Welcome back. We're back in the house. We're no longer in the car, so shout out to that. If you made it this far, leave your favorite emoji down in the comment section below. I think that I've managed to wind my way through all of my issues, everything that I thought about this book, mostly the bad things. There were a couple of good things. I do think it's well written. This is actually what I wanted to end on. So while I was in the process of, before Melanie sent me the ARC, I was in the process of, deciding if I wanted to pre-order the book, if I was going to just go on, March 3rd, today. When you're watching this, it's not today for me. I'm out here lying. If I was going to go and buy it the day of release and just try to read it super fast, which apparently I could have been able to do because I read this in like a day and a half. I was on some website. I want to say it was some like independent bookstore, but on the side of the column, on the sidebar or whatever, they had the like reviews of the book. There weren't that many.
at the time. I think there was like, they were showcasing 3 of them. And one of them was from Kirkus, which isn't really like a publication or anything that I particularly follow. I just know that authors tweet out the good reviews from Kirkus sometimes. But Kirkus had this to say about Docile, and if you take nothing away from my incoherent ramble, I hope you do take away this. Despite its excellent pacing and a gripping narrative, Spera fails to address the history of slavery in America, a history that is race-based and continues to shape the nation. This is a story with fully realized queer characters that is unafraid to ask complicated questions as a parable. It functions well, but without addressing this important aspect of the nation and economic structures within which it takes place, it cannot succeed in its takedown of oppressive systems. I could not agree more. If you've managed to read Docile, I know that quite a few people did get arcs. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you haven't read it, were you planning on reading it? I know that I went into some spoilery territory, so apologies, but not really. I'll have it in the title that there are massive like spoilery filled discussions to be had here, because I don't think you can really talk about this book with any kind of meaning without going into what people might consider a spoiler, and I wanted to be able to do that. I did not want to be vague and broad in the same way that I think aspects of this book tended to be. So yeah, that's everything I have to say about Docile by K.M. Spera. When it comes down to it, do I think you should go and buy this book? Yes, I would recommend people read it. I don't think that it is well executed in terms of a lot of the narrative choices, but I do think that it's well written. I do think that it's a fine, okay read. I wouldn't advise people not to buy it. I don't think that it would be a waste of your money, but I wouldn't pay full price for it. So if it's still discounted on like Barnes & Noble or an independent bookstore that you really want to support, or I don't buy books on Amazon, but if you wanted to buy your book on Amazon, go for it. Check it out from your local library, put it on hold, ask that they purchase it for you to check it out. I would say read the chapter sampler, because I do think that that's a pretty, I don't know if it's still available for free. I would assume so, but I don't know. I don't ever get chapter samplers just in general, and I definitely don't get them after a book has already been released, so I don't really know how that works. But I'm sure that the free previews are still up on Tor.com, so maybe check those out. Like I said, I think that it's well worth your time, but do go in knowing that the first part of the book, the first 150 so pages, really dark, really depressing. But please take care of yourself while reading this. This is by no means a light and fluffy read. So thanks for watching this far. If you liked what you saw here, make sure, like I said, leave that favorite emoji, leave a comment if you have any thoughts and opinions about the book. If you haven't read it, were you planning on reading it? If you weren't planning on reading it, maybe I changed your mind. Maybe you think that I'm wrong. It's been known to happen. But yeah, I look forward to reading those comments. If you liked what you saw here and you want to see more, you can click the subscribe button. I'll see you guys again soon in another video, whatever that happens to be. But until then, and until next time.